My name is Janet. I volunteer with Greenpeace Winnipeg Volunteer Group, along with a wonderful group of people who deeply care for the planet and who have invested lots of good energy behind the scenes so this event could be a reality. And today, I'll have the pleasure to facilitate the conversation with our great panelists. But before introducing them, and keeping the spirit of opening space to the voices that matter, let's listen to a group of brave young Namibians who are investing their best to prevent the environmental tragedy from happening. Let's listen.
Yes.
I'll be reading out a speech. We'll be handing over an open letter.
Yes.
And we're hoping that we can also hear something from your side and maybe your concerns about it.
Definitely.
All right. So, the Okavango Delta region is under threat from a Canadian fossil fuel company, ReconAfrica, despite protests and concern from UNESCO. The Okavango is a unique ecosystem supporting endangered species, native communities, and listed as the World Heritage Site. Not to mention it's the world's largest protected Ramsar wetland, as well as recently discovered as the potential homeland of all modern humans. Should ReconAfrica develop the hundreds of wells they have been marketing to their investors, Okavango River system and its communities could potentially be severely compromised. Ministry of Agriculture, Water, Land and Land Reform should call for a moratorium on ReconAfrica's drill project for the following reasons, amongst others. There has been inadequate assessment of the effects of the aquifers. We are also concerned about the amount of water needed to be extracted for this project, the risk of pollution of underground waters and its consequences years down the line, as well as the potential harm of viable ecosystems, the disturbance of economic activities such as ecotourism efforts, some of which have rivers and lakes and falls and rapids at their heart of their tourist centers. Drilling on the banks of the tributary of the Okavango poses a threat to the water network, eventually reaching the Okavango Delta. Whether or not the river is flowing on the surface, it is part of a connected groundwater system such as aquifers, which feed into the Okavango Delta. Irresponsible scenarios such as the unlined drill mud pit at ReconAfrica's first drill site says a lot about their efforts to mitigate contamination of underground water, which will harm people and wildlife. The Delta is part of a critical network supporting system spanning over several countries, Namibia, Angola, Botswana. Hence, the enabling of this project and its effects will not be restricted to Namibia. And finally, given the dire state of the climate crisis and the abundant wind and sun resources in Namibia, it is abstruse to understand why this plan is being pursued at all, locking the country into decades of oil and gas dependence at a time when we have passed big oil with low prices and with many countries phasing out of oil and gas for renewables. Our aim here today is to urge ministerial collaboration. Ministries with the responsibility of safeguarding the environment, water, land use, tourism, and energy should all be collaborating to ensure a well-rounded analysis. Respective ministries and parties ought to do their due diligence in representing the interests of the environment, local communities, current and future generations. And until that is the case, we call for a moratorium on the project until proper procedures have been followed and assessments conducted by all responsible ministries. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
So here's the open letter which goes further into detail, and yeah, we are looking forward to action from your ministry.
Thank you so much. My name is Crispin Matongela. I'm the Public Relations Officer of the Ministry of Agriculture, Water and Land Reform. I'm receiving your concerns with a sense that the High Office will look into these issues. Our Minister, Honorable Kalish Leitman, has taken note of your concerns, and all issues are also being registered by the office. That's why he sent me to come and receive your petition. He's very much aware. When you talk of issues of water extraction, the pollution, and the land degradation, we understand all those issues. All what I can say is that the issues will be forwarded to the minister, and in the process he will consult with his cabinet, to find out how your issues will be resolved. In short, that's what I can tell you. Thank you so much
for having us.
Yeah.
Thank you.
very serious issue. And among all these news that are so striking, is so warm-hearted and so inspiring to see these young women and these young people pushing forward these issues and giving their best to actually prevent irreversible environmental damage to happen. And now we also want to remember our ancestors and the people who have taken care of this beautiful land for so long before us, so we can enjoy it today. Here in Winnipeg, we live in the lands of Treaty Number 1 territory, which includes the traditional lands of the Anishinaabe, Cree, Oji-Cree, Dakota, and Dene peoples, and is the birthplace of the Métis Nation and the heart of the Métis Nation homeland. We wish that this acknowledgement inspires us to keep caring and loving the planet for generations to come. And now it's time to introduce our panelists. Ina-María Shikongo. She is an activist who focuses on solution-based campaigns. She is educator, artist, entrepreneur, activist, and co-founder of the movement Fridays for Future with Hope, and frontline activist in the campaign to save the Okavango Delta. Thanks so much, Ina, for being here, and happy Women's Month. And we are so happy to have you here.
Thank you for
we also have here Jamie Kneen. He is Mining Watch Canada's communication and outreach coordinator. His efforts also include Mining Watch research and advocacy in Africa, as well as uranium mining and environmental assessment policy and practice in Canada. You're very welcome, Jamie. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Jeanette.
And we also have Alex Speers-Roesch. He is a lifelong activist who's been working at Greenpeace Canada on climate change and other critical environmental issues for over a decade now. Thank you so much again for being here and for sharing your insights with us. To facilitate the conversation, each panelist we will address a series of questions to each panelist. There are going to be 4 questions and in a series of 4 rounds. And our panelists will have 2 minutes to share their thoughts on those subjects. At the end of our conversation, we will have 15 minutes to address questions from our audience. So please feel free to send us your questions through the question and answer box that is at the bottom of your screen. We will do our best to get them all to our panelists. And so now is the time for our conversation, and I'd love to address the first question to Ina. Could you please give us an update on what is happening in the Okavango Delta?
Yes, I hope you can hear me. Yeah? Okay, so ReconAfrica has started drilling its first well in Kavango East in Kawe, and they have prepared the second site at Barbee. The one thing that the 2 sites have in common is the fact that I know that at Kawe they don't have a water permit. It was probably at Barbee as well, no water permit. The drills are sitting on people's fields that were not compensated. They just went in and decided to just put the drill wherever. And the one guy who's Andreas in Kawe, we know that his field has been now reduced, and he actually depends on that. He used to depend on that fact. Now that his field has been reduced, he doesn't know how he has to look after his family members, and he's got 3 people with disabilities living with him as well. So his life has been quite impacted, and obviously the community members are also being threatened by Recon, and obviously the officials that are behind it. There have been greenwashing, obviously saying that they're doing nothing. It has been tabled in Parliament. We have given in petitions to the Parliament, to Ministry of Land, Agriculture, Water Affairs, sorry for mixing up that one. And also we went to the Ombudsman as well. And last year in December, we went to UNESCO. So we're just trying to put pressure wherever we can so this can be stopped. But it seems to be very difficult because of the political backing. Yeah.
Lots going on. Thank you so much, Ina, for giving us that update. And when we hear about everything that is happening in the Okavango Delta and all the very harmful effects that oil exploitation fuel produces, we wonder, why do we keep exploiting fossil fuel despite of all these this vast evidence of long-lasting harm and the damage that it produces locally and globally? Alex, maybe you could help us enlighten this question.
Yeah, for sure. It's I think it's a really good question. I think you can answer it on a couple different levels. I think at the simplest level, it's basically that the political forces in favor of fossil fuels have generally been stronger than the political forces in favor of alternatives. And so for that reason, we still see fossil fuel projects going ahead in a lot of cases. It is starting to shift a bit. The balance of power is shifting, but that tends to be how it goes in most places. The biggest actor there on the sort of pro-fossil fuel side is the fossil fuel industry. And they have really been very effective at blocking efforts to address the environmental and social harms that their industry is causing, and to keep people using fossil fuels and keep technologies based on fossil fuel energy to keep those in place. And then there's a whole bunch of institutions around fossil fuel companies that are really playing an enabling role and that support the fossil fuel sector and enable them to continue doing what they're doing and support these projects and make sure they go ahead. It's politicians, it's banks, it's PR firms, it's media. There's a whole network there that really is supporting the sector and making it so that these destructive projects keep going ahead despite the social harms that they cause. I would say too, on sort of a deeper level, you can also look at some deeper systemic issues about sort of why that balance of power that I just mentioned, why that's the case. I think on the one hand, poverty and wealth inequality is a big driving factor. A lot of communities want development and they are told that they'll get benefits out of it. And so understandably, sometimes they say yes. But I think if we had a more equitable distribution of wealth, we would address some of those underlying issues so people wouldn't feel pressure to take projects that they don't really want, just to be able to provide employment or sort of baseline economic security. Corporations also put profit first, and they hoard the benefits to themselves and push the costs on others. So I think those are some of the deeper seated reasons why we see that happen.
Thank you so much, Alex, and help us better understand. And then it makes me think corporations are there and they keep doing their operations. And we think, how can we get protected? There must be something. And so I'd like to ask this question to Jamie. We have heard of this notion of corporate environmental and social responsibility. And can you tell us a little bit more, what does these notions mean and how do these duties effectively help protect environmental damage from happening? We can't hear you, Jamie. Sorry.
Really helps if I unmute myself, doesn't it? You'd think we'd get used to this after being on Zoom for a while, but no. I was just saying, I think it's a good question, and it really links back to what Alex was saying about, these operations are profitable, and that's, we've got a financialized investment system that rewards that kind of short-term profit and more than anything else. And so that's why we've heard now about corporate social responsibility, the idea that investment should be, and corporations should be contributing value to the broader community, and not just to shareholders, not just creating value for shareholders, but actually creating value for society at large. And that's now also increasingly being reframed, and you might hear it coming out as environmental, social, and governance criteria for shareholders, for investors to look at when they're looking at where to put their money. And we can talk for a long time about whether that's a useful kind of way of doing things. Corporate social responsibility, it's meant to really provide benefits to the affected communities, to workers, by providing improved conditions, environmental enhancement, putting money into local parks or wetlands or woods, local purchasing for local businesses to try and support the community, small business and medium business. But it's also often criticized for not being terribly ambitious. You look at the amount of money that goes into corporate social responsibility compared, for example, to how much they pay their chief executive officers, and it's not much. And also the measures are often kind of superficial, so not really contributing to sustainability over the long run, and not addressing fundamental needs. So companies will put money into schools or clinics, but they only operate while the company is active. And as soon as that support is gone, the clinic shuts down, or the school is shut down, and the community is left, basically as it was, only now with this, environmental liability of the destruction of these extractive projects. And it doesn't include paying taxes. So governments try to attract or reward investment, and companies take full advantage of that and then multiply it by a whole variety of legal and illegal mechanisms.
So just reframing a bit. So when we talk about this environmental responsibility, I am curious, how do they approach community if there are process that they should follow, or how do they ensure that they can meet this environmental responsibility, and what the impact of their operations can be on the land? Jamie.
Yeah. Well, there aren't any legal requirements, and that's one of the problems. You've got local legal requirements, permits and processes, environmental impact processes, and so on, that we heard about a bit in the film. But from this end, from the Canadian end, we've got the federal anti-corruption law, the Corruption of Foreign Public Officials Act, but it isn't seriously enforced, and it's basically just an international embarrassment. People sometimes sort of think that Canadian companies are supposed to follow Canadian laws. That's not actually a legal requirement. And Canadian laws aren't that great either, and they're not enforced very well. As I mentioned about the anti-corruption law not being enforced, but environmental protections aren't really enforced very well here either. I've got a piece here from the Narwhal about fracking in northeastern BC, and it's really quite astonishing. And it's all perfectly legal, or at least the laws are not effectively enforced. We had another example here in Canada of the Mount Polley mine waste disaster, which was the largest spill in Canadian history. And it was not a single prosecution. In fact, Mining Watch tried to lay charges under the Fisheries Act, and we were shut down by the Crown Prosecutor. So, at the same time, internationally, the Canadian government says it expects Canadian companies to respect local laws wherever they operate. But in fact, it makes no effort to ensure that they do this. And what it really does is work very hard to ignore the environmental and human rights abuses associated with these operations, and to support Canadian companies no matter what. And so, often it really comes down to local authorities and local laws and the efforts of local groups and legal groups to try and get their laws improved and enforced, and to protect their own rights.
Lots to do, and lots of space for improvement, I can see. Ina, I'm curious if you could let us know How have been the engagement of ReconAfrica with the local communities, and how their operations have been explained to the community? And when you have raised your concerns about the environment and the impact that these operations can have on the community, how has been this engagement?
To be honest with you, there was no engagement before the story broke out, and the EIA was already issued. So one is wondering what community engagement was done. They only started doing the community engagements after we started making noise. So they had one in one of the villages. I think they had two, I'm not sure, but they had more than one. And obviously it was done in English, you had translators, but the material was not translated into the indigenous languages either. So, and those people, they don't really speak English. So you need a translator. So the materials should have been translated in the indigenous languages, which was obviously not done. And right now at the second site, they still have not had the community engagement. They left the community hanging for 3 hours before the underdog, Alois Ngende, went there, who is also claiming the chiefdom, even though he never got married to the previous chief because she passed away, 15 days before the wedding. And he took the liberty to actually give the permission to do the drilling in Kawe. And I mean, until now, they still don't have a leader. And this guy is now claiming that he is the leader when there are laws. And also, Kavango being a matriarchal society, it's the chiefdom does not go to the husband, not even the father of the children. But anyway, so there was no community engagement done there. But the second pit is done. And also, they've also destroyed the soccer field as well. The community had no idea. So yeah, it has been very poor. And obviously having backing from up there, it is much easier to manipulate and intimidate the people. But even the community engagement that they had here in Windhoek, it was a total, it was actually a disaster because they had no idea what they were talking about. And when you look at the presentations of what they're talking about and what they were presenting there, you can see that they have no idea what they're talking about. These are like cowboys. Even me, who started educating myself since the story broke out, it seems like I know more than they do, about what they're doing. And it just shows the incompetence of the state and also ReconAfrica, because they are amateurs. And also they've got very little regard for the Namibian people, the people of Kavango. And it's like Jamie was saying, now we can see why the people of Kavango were being kept poor, because yeah, it's just easier to bring in these companies and let the people and tell the people whatever it is that they want. And the people just say yes, because they don't have that input from the government from the beginning. Yeah, hope it answers.
I see. Wow. Is something that we shall regret, that this engagement has been so poor, and that the governments, we kind of expect that they help us with these negotiation, or facilitate the information and the permits and what is good for the people. They have been letting us a little bit aside. And now I am wondering, so we have seen that there is not too much corporate environmental responsibility that we can claim, and we have seen all the long-lasting harm that fossil fuel operations produce. So I'd like to ask you, Alex, what are the challenges to fossil fuel divestment and transitioning to a green and sustainable economy?
Yeah, well, as you can imagine, they are many. I think we've touched on a few of them so far. I mean, I think sort of all the issues that I just mentioned about why we're still having these fossil fuel projects, each of those sort of present their own particular challenges. And what the other speakers in the videos that we saw, I think they add a lot of sort of detail and show how some of those things work out in practice. But there's a lot of barriers to overcome for sustainable development. So I think that's sort of one key challenge there. I think another key challenge too is that it's very multidimensional. You can't just look at climate change or just look at water, just look at jobs. You have to look at all of those together and take a comprehensive, holistic view towards environmental sustainability, social sustainability, equity. So there's a lot of things to keep track of. And that you know, I don't want to understate the challenge of it. It is legitimately difficult in a lot of cases to find that sort of good green path. There are a lot of options there, but it takes work and it takes energy. And sometimes trying to solve one problem can create others, especially if you're not grounding it in a underlying concern for sustainability and equity. For example, you know, the minerals for electric vehicles. Electric vehicles can help reduce greenhouse gas emissions, but there are some companies that want to mine the deep sea floor for minerals for electric vehicles and for other metals. That brings up a whole host of environmental problems. So you need to be careful while you're not while you're addressing one issue that you're not creating other problems. I'd say another big challenge too is greenwash. That's been touched on a bit as well so far. But as there's growing awareness that sustainability is important, that equity is important, more and more companies are trying to, and governments are trying to create the appearance of addressing these issues without actually addressing them. They sort of want the benefits of it without having to do the work. And it can be hard to distinguish truth from deception when it comes to sustainability. Yeah, so I think those sort of contribute to a lot of the problems that are there. But I do want to say, lest it sound negative, I do think it is very possible, and we are having progress and moving forward. So, you know, the solutions are there. We're doing a better job of adopting them, but we just need to accelerate it to overcome more of these challenges.
Thanks for giving us hope. And it seems to me that is very instrumental that the mechanism, that there are mechanisms that help us actually protect the environment, that they can really hold accountable the corporations. So I'd like to ask you, Jamie, what needs to be improved in the existing mechanisms, like, for example, CORE here in Canada, so they can efficiently prevent irreversible environmental damages from happening? And also, if you can explain us a little bit what CORE is.
Sure. The CORE is the Canadian Ombudsperson for Responsible Enterprise, which is a new mechanism that the Canadian government has set up, but it kind of looks a lot like other complaints offices that they've had over the last few years, which didn't really do anything useful. You know, they're supposed to receive complaints from communities affected by Canadian corporate involvement overseas in mining, oil and gas, and now even in textiles. And the problem is that we need actual controls on what Canadian companies are allowed to do, and a complaints mechanism like this, even if it worked, couldn't really prevent bad things from happening. But if it were at least effective in addressing some of those alleged violations, it could push companies to be much more careful, just because they don't want to face the consequences. You know, for that to work, it would need to have the power to undertake independent investigations and subpoena evidence and witnesses, which it doesn't have. And there also have to be some consequences, at the very least, for example, to withdraw Canadian diplomatic financial support through Export Development Canada or Canada Pension Plan Investment. And, you know, so we're actually involved in campaigns for that very purpose. The Canadian Network on Corporate Accountability has been trying to push the Canadian government, you know, for a decade now, to actually have some kind of effective complaints mechanism, but also to put some kind of conditions on this support that it provides, because it, you know, the Canadian government really promotes Canadian investment especially in mining and oil and gas, and you know, they need to have some criteria in place around that. And at the same time, I think it's also important to reinforce international agreements and standards for environmental protection, for environmental impact assessment, and so on. And Canada used to be much more engaged in this. Of course, we also used to be much more of an international leader when it comes to environmental protection and environmental impact assessment. And we're still struggling to regain that, to rebuild the science that was built on, and so on. So there's a lot of work to do. I mean, I think maybe we're going in the right direction, but there is a lot that we need to do.
Thanks, Jamie. I think I've received a very interesting petition that we will be sharing with our audience, and it is related to this ask to improve those mechanisms, and it is related to the situation happening in the Okavango Delta. So hopefully we manage to bring some change that help us protect better the environment. And as I'm listening from you, I'm listening more and more parties. There is the government, there is the mechanisms, there are policymakers, there are the corporations. I'd like to ask you, Alex, so explain us a little bit more the parties that are involved in the process of phasing out fossil fuel and transitioning to a green sustainable economy. And most of all, where does our collective power reside to help protect the environment from threats like this one?
Yeah, definitely. So as you said, there are a lot of actors here. It can be a little bit bewildering sometimes. There's governments, there's corporations, and then there's different kinds of corporations. There's the fossil fuel companies, renewable energy companies, banks that are financing them all. There's civil society NGOs like Greenpeace and Mining Watch, and activists like Ina-María and Fridays for Future. Civil society actors that are engaging around these issues. There's media, there's indigenous communities, there's workers. So there are a lot of different actors here, and they all have an important role to play. And they are all important. I guess I would, to simplify things a bit though, I would say that for those that are listening, my top line message would be that the most important actor is you. Because all of us, all the individuals out here, whatever our level of engagement is, we're all actors in what's happening. We're all actors in the green transition, and we're all actors in what the fossil fuel industry is doing in one way or another, even if it's just as a sort of observer or someone who's standing on the side. And so for me, a really important question is, how do we become aware of the power that we have in this situation, and how do we use that power and act with the power that we have to help address some of the issues that we've seen today. And that sort of leads into the second part of your question about like, where does our collective power reside? I would say it's in sort of, individuals and people acting, but joining together to do it. I think it's really in our collective power and collective people power. That's how these problems get addressed and change happens. I think Ina-María mentioned that the government never really started paying attention to or talking about the environmental issues until people started criticizing them about it, and there was media stories about how this was an issue. I think you see that kind of pattern over and over and over again. And so, yeah, I think that is sort of the source of power to address these issues, is joining with other people, joining with other groups like Fridays for Future, Greenpeace, Mining Watch, so many different organizations that are out there to work with people who also care about these issues, and to help sort through some of the complexity in a given situation, to know whether you should write a letter to a government or to a company or go to a protest, or what sort of action makes the most sense in a given situation.
Thank you, Alex. And it empowers us a little bit when facing these kind of issues that are so huge sometimes to understand. There are so many intricacies on the process, and I cannot thank you enough for raising your voices, and you in the ground raising your voices and investigating what's going on and sharing with us. And I know you do a big job also talking with the people who have leverage to change this process. And definitely to the audience, please support these campaigns, because today with these technologies and social media, there is power that we have, and we need to keep pushing. And but I want to hear more from you. And so, Ina, I'd like to ask you, what is the risk and why is it so important to take action? What would be humanity losing if this project goes on?
Well, first of all, if our water gets contaminated, then what happens to the people around the Okavango Basin? So we are looking at the potential genocide happening, especially looking at the demographics of the country, which is basically a desert. And one thing that I learned from a good friend this week is the fact that the Okavango Delta is logged. It is not like the Niger Delta where there's a stream that goes into the ocean. Is that the toxicity is going to stay there, and it's obviously it is going to impact our communities. People that live off subsistence farming, the San people, their indigenous way of life is going to be impacted, just like it was mentioned in the documentary. You know, there are forests, I mean, there are foragers and hunter-gatherers, so they live off the veld. They think that just because it's empty spaces that it is not inhabited. You know, it is, I'm sorry, but we don't have a huge carbon footprint, unlike many so-called developed countries. Maybe they have a lot to learn from us, actually. Sorry, we are the developed ones, let me just add that. So they now think that, you know, like these people that are going to be impacted. And then you've got the wildlife. And then you've got all of these so-called hunters and whatnot coming in, but they are actually killing the food that belongs to the people that live there. You know, you know, those animals have been there for millennia. The people have been there for millennia. And now we have lost all of our rights. So even Namibia being a dry country and looking now what is happening in the Kunene, which is the western part of Namibia, there's a severe drought going on. The Himba people, they are like facing severe drought. You have people coming from Angola into Namibia because there's no food in Angola. And yet our government in ReconAfrica, they want to poison the only place that has water throughout the year, that has potential to actually make us self-sustainable in terms of food security. So this is like daylight robbery, and it is a genocide, and it is an ecocide. And we will come after the Canadian government if anything happens, because ReconAfrica, those are your people. We did not ask for them. Please come get them. We don't want them. End of the story. Thank you.
Thanks, Ina. Thank you so much. And that's why we are spreading the voice here, because it seems that it is far from here, but it's very close to our hearts to care for the environment, and it's totally unacceptable. You mentioned big words, genocide, and all the harm that it can carry, is potentially carry, is very serious. So thank you for sharing with us and for speak out and bring your voice and the voice of all these people who don't have the power to be here right now. So thank you so much. And we hope that we keep being amplifying this voice of yours, and hopefully we get some help and some real effective answers. At least sharing some, bringing some awareness today. And so time is keeps passing, and we want to approach some questions from our attendees. But before, I'd like to maybe give a quick round of your final remarks, solutions that you think about this subject. Maybe Alex wants to get us started.
Yeah, sure. I guess just, yeah, building off what I was saying, and sort of people taking action being sort of the source of change. You know, people are often like, oh, what's a lifestyle change that I can make to help the environment or make the world better? What's one thing I can do? And I like to answer to that the sort of most important thing you can do is to become an activist and make taking action a regular part of your life. and don't just make it sort of one thing, but make it a regular thing that you do on an ongoing basis. Yeah, like, you know, do something every week. Sign the petition that Ina-María just shared in the chat. Get involved in this issue. Get involved in other issues in your community. Take action and make taking action a regular part of your ongoing existence and sort of what you do in your work and in your community and in the life that you live. And then maybe also I would say as well, it's, you know, the problems are really difficult and can be heavy and hard. And I hope I'm not jumping the gun, but I saw a comment, one of the questions about sort of activist fatigue. And so I guess a suggestion I would have as well is to also focus on the positive vision, even as we're talking about these bad things that we need to stop. Also, you know, keep in mind the wonderful, beautiful things that we're working to protect and the possibilities of a better world that we're all trying to create together. So that would be, you know, another takeaway I'd suggest. And remember that change is possible, and that, you know, for all the bad things that are happening, we are having successes. And the more people that get on board and the more people that take action, the more successes that we can have. And it really, it is attainable to address these problems, even though sometimes they can seem like big and overwhelming and really difficult to tackle. But many, you know, if we all do our part and we all take action, you know, we can do it.
Thanks, Alex. And Jamie, what would be your final remarks, solution statement?
My wrap up is, well, there are really practical measures that can control these activities, and the problem is that they go against the sort of neoliberal capitalist agenda that the Canadian government's committed to. There's no legitimate business reason, for example, for companies to operate through subsidiaries in tax havens and secrecy jurisdictions. And Canada could support the protection of the environment and human rights instead of working to undermine that protection in favor of a return on Canadian investment. That's going to take a lot of work. You know, and in the meantime, it's important to keep pushing, keep applying pressure on the Canadian government, on the companies themselves, but it's especially important to support the communities and the Indigenous peoples who are on the front line, who are defending the environment and defending their own livelihoods. So whatever mechanisms they have access to and whatever action they're able to take will be that much stronger with our solidarity and support. And that's where we need to stand. We need to support them, but we also need to clean up our own act. And, you know, coming back to that question about activist fatigue, I mean, I fully agree with Alex. You know, the best thing is to feel that you are doing something, that you're able to do something, and to, you know, channel your energy into positive work and really into organizing. You know, I think it's also important to recognize that there's a lot being lost there, and you know, we shouldn't gloss over that loss and that sense of grief, the fact that, you know, we're losing species, we're losing, you know, and whether it's with a pandemic or any, you know, other diseases and afflictions, we're losing friends and relatives along the way, and things don't always look that great. But, you know, at the same time, what we're trying to do is really important and really positive. And I always take a lot of inspiration from the people that we're working with, you know, the people on the ground, the people that we work with, the people who are on this call are some of the best people around. And it's really amazing to be part of that and to work together. So that, you know, that's what keeps me going. Thanks.
Thank you, Jamie. Definitely thank you all. And I for sure want to hear what Ina has to tell us. I like to tell us, what is your call to Canadians? And also tell us, what would you like to see in the future for the Okavango region?
I think the one thing that I would like to stress is really the importance of divesting, because while the global north is debating, the whole world is losing paradises such as the Okavango Delta right now. It's happening in the Bahamas, it is happening everywhere. And so there is really no time. And it is also a matter of survival. It is just not, oh yes, we need to divest. It is fun to protest. No, it is because people's lives depend on it. So please go and knock on Justin Trudeau's office. Tell him the Okavango Delta is on his, it is his baby now. It is his government baby, you know, ReconAfrica. So please go knock on his door and tell him that Canada will be responsible. It is ReconAfrica is from Canada. And if you look at their sites, they have the Canadian flag and the Namibian flag on top, you know, like proper neo-colonialist. So can we please stop repeating history? We have seen this for millennia of years. You know, it happens in Canada, it happens in the Americas, it happens in Africa. How long are we supposed to sacrifice our lives so you people in the global north can have electricity, electric cars? How long? You know, I mean, let's stop greenwashing here and just admit the fact that my continent, my people, the core of Black Lives Matter, we are being enslaved by a system that is upkeeping the standard of life in the global north, and yet it is condemning us to death and extinction. And that is the truth. So please knock on Justin's door. Oh, sorry, His Honorable, His Excellency, I don't know those terms, but please knock on Justin's door and tell him Ina-María said hi. Please come get your people out of the Okavango. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ina. We totally support you. And with the good news is that people's power is here more and more. And we definitely have a collective power. We just need to use it. So this is the good news, and hopefully this conversation inspires us to act more. And now I'd like to get into some of our participants' questions. They're very good questions. Let's see if we have time for all of them. So one is, why is the oil industry not investing in renewable energy? And would it be beneficial for them? Wouldn't it be beneficial for them because it could give them sustainable income in the long term? So basically, why don't we invest more in renewable energy industries? Who wants to pitch in?
Go for it, Alex.
James.
All right, I can say, I mean, the short answer is it's less profitable for them in their minds. They think they can make more money by investing in fossil fuel projects than renewables. They are starting to do some investments in renewables, but it's largely a PR exercise and a sort of response to public pressure and criticism for what they're doing, in order to try to deflect that criticism and be able to say, oh, look, we're not so bad. But it's a lot of greenwash. But you know, it's because they prioritize profit ahead of sort of public good or any sort of concern about ethics or morality or their responsibility to society. So I think that also sort of points to the need for us to engage, to sort of change the context in which they're operating, so that they're not allowed to move forward with these destructive projects, so that you know, Ina-María mentioned divestment, like so banks aren't financing it, investors aren't providing money, to put pressure on all the institutions that are enabling this activity and perpetuating it to stop.
Jamie?
No, I think that pretty much covers it, yeah.
Okay. So I'd like to, okay, there is another question here we have. Maybe Ina, you can tell us, are men and women impacted differently? How are they impacted from these unattainable, from these operations? So is there a way in which it impacts more women or men, and how do we understand this?
Well, first of all, it's a job where you don't really see women working. So I don't know what employment creation that they are talking about, because it's exclusive of women already. And also then they come with the men camps, and obviously we know what happens with the men camps and the rapes and so women are definitely very negatively impacted here. And also when you look at the community meeting that they had apparently in Kawe, Kawe's got a village of 4,000 people, and because it's COVID regulations, you can only have 50 people. But they only had 9 people from the community of 4,000 people. And of how many were women? They could not answer that question, So 9 individuals. And anyway, it is also like when you look at this industry per se, they're not even employing the people from the area. It is, okay, I think it's 800 people that applied, 50 people that got employed, of 17 of which are Namibian, and 3 people are from the village, which are being fired every 12 days. So there is a rotation every 12 days where you have new people coming in. So it is not really it is not beneficial to the community at all, either it be men or women, and even less for the women as well. And also because obviously they work in the fields. So if the water has been poisoned and the air, how are they going to survive? Because they grow the food so they can grow it on the market. So now that is being taken away by this so-called company that is doing development, instead they're just doing destruction. So it is an industry that is very dirty, like very, very dirty. Dirty is even a clean word, I don't know what one can compare it to, but it's very inhuman. Let me put it that way.
Thanks for that, enlightening us on that question, Ina. And it seems that there is a lot of research done on the impacts of oil exploitation, and the evidence is there, yet where is research needed currently to help support policy change? Maybe Jamie, you want to tackle that one?
Yeah, well, in some sense, I think we know a lot already, and in some sense, what we need is action, not more research. I mean, there's lots more that we could learn about, social and environmental impacts of all of these activities and so on. But I think in a way, the real gap is in making use of the research that already exists, the information that we have. But I would say if there's one thing that really needs attention, it is bringing the voices of the affected communities into the forefront and hearing, not from researchers, but from the people that they're doing research on. Bringing, and Ina-María has done that for us today. The film did that, visiting people and so on. So in a sense, I think it's that kind of applied research and participatory research that really brings the people into the picture that we need more of. I don't know if Ina-María has.
Yes, I have something to say. I think we also need accountability, because accountability is something that this industry has been running away. We can see what is happening with Chevron. We can see what is happening with Shell in the Niger Delta. And that is what is missing. They need to be held accountable, because they always get away with it, which is why they are expanding, because there's no accountability. So we cannot wait for ecocide law to pass. It has to happen now. So it's like Jamie said, we need action, but also accountability. And that starts from a policy level, meaning that EU or whoever is up there making decisions for us people here. No, it is those guys that need to start paying, because it is just not pipelines. Like on your side, you get the oil spills and then you get the spills. But on our side, it is people losing their lives. It is people that are dying. It is people that are being killed. Look at what is happening in Mozambique. Mercenaries just shooting innocent people. So on our side, it is way worse that you can't even imagine, you can't. So we need accountability. These companies need to be held accountable. And we are also looking at Iraq, at Afghanistan, we are looking at Libya. We need accountability, including Yemen. You know, this is like genocide of everyone that is connected to the earth. It is killing biodiversity. It is killing people. It is racism, environmental racism, or whatever you want to call it. This is what this industry is fueling. And it has to stop, and it starts with accountability.
Thanks, Ina. Accountability is definitely a must here, a point that is very important, and it has to do with the governments and policymakers and all these mechanisms that should be helping us protect and prevent actually these humongous damages. And there is another question from a participant. So on the one hand, we have the mechanism, the legal mechanisms to hold accountability. And there is also the issue of divestment, the money that's moving the things behind. And so how can people find out more about which companies and investments are putting large amounts of money into big oil to possibly make sure they are not indirectly founding oil?
I can try to take a shot at that. I mean, if you're interested in sort of like numbers and data, Rainforest Action Network just released a report a week or two ago, or maybe just this past week, basically documenting the big banks and their level of financing for fossil fuels. So there's a lot of detailed information there. And depending on your bank, you know, the big 5 Canadian banks are all on that list. They're all big financiers of oil and fossil fuels. So that can be a good source of information to look for there. I'm assuming if this question is coming from a Canadian, at least in Canada, yeah, like our biggest banks are all heavily involved in fossil fuels and a lot of these bad activities. You kind of tend to have to go to smaller credit unions to find less involvement. Even there, it can be tricky to, you know, some of them are involved. So it's always good to ask questions. And you know, even if you are banking with one of the big banks, I'll put pressure on them. You know, you can leave for a credit union, but you still need to, it's still important to tell them, you know, what the bad activities that they're involved in, that it's unacceptable, and that they need to stop. If you do have investments as well, you know, whoever is doing that for you, tell them you want a fossil fuel free fund and you don't want any involvement with fossil fuels. Unfortunately, a lot of the, you know, sustainable or socially responsible investment funds, they are still heavily involved in fossil fuels and a lot of these bad practices. Unfortunately, you know, yeah, the SRI funds, they tend to be less about being actually socially responsible. It's more about, you know, can you do a program or two that you say, oh, look, we're doing something nice, like put a few windmills or solar panels on a few projects, and then it's like, oh, we're doing something green, therefore we're, you know, we should be in this socially responsible fund. So don't necessarily assume that because it's in a fund like that, it's any protection against those things. Ask questions and you know, demand funds that are divested from fossil fuels.
Thank you, Alex. We are approaching the end of our call, and before we go, I see there are some takeaway. Please remember that we all have power and our collective power counts. Thanks for being here, and help us amplify the voices of these great people who are working for these affected directly communities, but also for all of us, because environmental damage does not know frontiers and it affects our home planet Earth. So please join the movement, do whichever action you can do. Each little action counts. Share the voice, use social media, pressure your governments and your policymakers, stay informed, sign petitions, sign open letters, search where your money goes and what your money is feeding, and keep giving love to planet Earth and to all the activists who are really doing the very hard work so we can keep enjoying life for us and also for future generations. Thank you all for being here. And we're getting to the end of our call, but thank you so much to our very distinguished panelists And keep doing your great job, because we really appreciate that in future generations too. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks very much.